The most affected people with climate change are the poor of the poorest, the marginalized, those who are in the rural areas, who also depend on farming as their way of life.
It makes me angry that climate change actually makes the social injustices in the Philippines more greater.
When we, as people, as a planet even, collectively want to tackle climate change, want to stop dirty energy, stop fossil fuels, in fact, we're not able to because we've signed deals in the interest of corporations, which mean we can't act in our own interests. So we're seeing this entire journey of power being transferred to big business and away from people.
There are countries that are trying to take actions, strong actions, to mitigate climate change and to protect the environment. But they are prevented from doing that by companies attacking them because of possible lost profits.
So in Canada, in Quebec, they were looking into fracking, and the local community, the local population had already seen what happened in the US and how damaging fracking was and how it pollutes water and it pollutes your land and kills your animals. And they decided they didn't want it. And in fact, the company who had invested in the fracking, called Lone Pine, used a free trade deal between Canada and the US, NAFTA, to sue the Quebecois government, the local government, to say, your ban on fracking, despite it being what the people wanted, despite it being the local government that said this is what we're going to do, you're not allowed to do this.
It's going to be really important for the environmental movement to start paying attention to these trade agreements, because a lot of things that they're asking for will actually be illegal under these trade agreements.
Problemet er ikke internasjonal handel. At vi handler med hverandre er bra og viktig. Problemet er at man setter noen betingelser I de internasjonale handels- og investeringsavtalene som er urettferdige.
I mean, ultimately, the trade deal that's on the table between the US and the EU, or the US and others, is going to undermine any chance we have of delivering on a decent climate deal. So if in the future we decide, actually, we don't want any more nuclear energy in France, they can say, actually, that piece of regulation, it doesn't fit with a free trade deal because you're hindering trade. If we say we don't want the tar sands in Europe, they say, well, I'm sorry, we've already signed a deal and any future regulation we can't do.
Corporations now are basically, allowed to take over this sovereign kind of country and cancel out their own democratic decision-making process.
Instead of the people having more influence over the governments to implement climate change policies that would help them adapt to the impacts of climate change and reduce the people's vulnerability. Through these free trade agreements, the corporations are the ones being given more power to decide what kinds of policies will be implemented.
I would say that climate agreements, as free trade agreements, serve mainly the interests of corporations. Before, 30 years ago, 20 years ago, it was mainly environmentalists that were negotiating, that were there trying to find an agreement to solve the problem of the environment. Now you can see, and I saw it with my own eyes, you have too many businessmen involved in the negotiations, not only lobbying, but also as negotiators of countries.
So what we're seeing in terms of trade and climate are three very dangerous things. We're seeing a current race to the bottom, which means our environmental standards and abilities to tackle climate change are getting weaker right now. We're also seeing in place this Regulatory Cooperation Council, which means any future regulation will be scrutinized by big business. And then if that fails, we're seeing a third thing, which is a secret court, which allows big business to then take countries to court if they're regulating or acting in the public interest, which is affecting big business profits.
So we find out most of our governments are no longer interested in paying attention to their people. So I think there's need for us to start even at the local level in our own respective countries to lobby and advocate and inform our governments, give them our demands.
Vi har greid å bekjempe urettferdige handels- og investeringsavtaler tidligere, men skal vi greie det igjen, så trenger vi å være flere.
We need to build very strong social movements, both in the south and in the north, and together if possible, and to force our governments to do this. They're not going to give it to us. We will need to make it happen.
The reason the environment's suffering is the same reason that people are suffering. If we tackle climate change, and we do this in a structural way, where we actually reclaim power for people, for the planet, then we can completely transform the world. Not just the climate, not just the environment, but society. We can transform the power structures. We can say, actually, we've had enough of having the 1% controlling the resources, to setting wages, and controlling what sort of environment we live in. And so I think there's this real, I think climate change is a huge opportunity, because changing it changes everything.